Style is a complicated thing. Taste trends tend to be fickle and don't really translate one-to-one with personal ideals. Here's a good example. Orange is my favorite color. I dress in a lot of earth tones and I like browns and wood grains and stuff that other people find ugly. Probably has something to do with the environment I grew up in and this intrinsic attachment I have to things that are rural and rustic. And yet, despite all this is the ugliest shit I've ever seen in my life. The Brady Bunch should have stayed in black and white. I worked in a grocery store as they did this huge renovation to make all the floors orange. Why? I don't know, man. I'm sure it increased customer spending by like 0.69% or something, but it became such a nauseating space to work in. And despite all this, I still love orange. It's a cool color. It's bright and it's vibrant and it reminds me of cheese. And design is similar. You can like cool boy-coded character design, but it's very possible for something to be too cool. There's this interesting bit of trivia about Luxray from Pokemon. Originally, he was designed to be a lot cooler than he is, but it turns out he was, a little bit too cool. And so in the design phase, they had to lose some of the details and make him softer, and the idea was that this would make him more memorable. Simplicity is often important and people get turned off by over-designed characters. Like all taste though, this isn't universal. People like the Bay Transformers despite them looking like a child with a hyperfixation and built them out of $1 million worth of Meccano. Kids don't still play with Meccano, right? I think that died in the 90s. How do you know when something is too cool and needs to be reeled in a bit and made a bit cuter? How about the inverse? How do you know if something is too cute and needs to be given a bit of an edge? Well, are cute and cool diametrically opposed even? I think it's time for some charts. On this chart, you can place any character ever created. Let's do some tests so you can get a handle on it. Let's start off with Johnny Bravo. He's the world's coolest incel, but he's got a soft cartoony design. His character wouldn't work if he was done up like handsome Squidward. Kirby is somewhere over here, cute as a button with just enough attitude and edge to be more than a puffball. As you get further to the corners though, you see designs that were either popular in a specific zeitgeist or are highly divisive with regards to who is and isn't drawn to them. Stuff like He-Man and G.I. Joe are the epitome of 80s hyper-masculine coolness, but this design type has fallen off pretty drastically over the last 30 years. Something as soft as Barney has a pretty defined target market and not much universal appeal outside of that. So here we see cool and cute. But this one up here? Well, that's where things get a bit weird. This is the domain of the truly despicable and off-kilter, but weird is important. And it's often overlooked by laymen when it comes to character design. Kind of like how some of the most beautiful people you've ever seen are attractive in an unconventional way, a little bit of personality does a lot. Just like the other two, you probably want to avoid the very tip of this triangle the way most people are capable of avoiding trying to hook up with underage girls, but a bit of wackiness or grime seasons the design in an important way. Spawn is cool as hell, he's grimdark incarnate, but it requires a lot of weird to pull this type of design off without becoming self-parody. You can argue with, 20 years of hindsight that it doesn't actually achieve this, but that's another discussion. The aliens of NGE steer hard into the weird and unknowable, but they still have that cool edge to them. Most Digimon designs fall somewhere in this area too, especially a lot of the old art, and it did wonders in differentiating it from the much cuter and established monster franchise they were directly competing against. But what about the third monster franchise? What about Monster Rancher? Well, Monster Rancher is definitely uglier than Pokemon, but maybe not as starkly ugly as Digimon was at its most extreme. It also doesn't play into the cool factor as hard as Digimon, even with stuff like Durahan and Dragon obviously being Tecmo's attempt at filling this gap. Monster Rancher's overall design philosophy is a lot more centralized than the other franchises, which is understandable given how the game functions with combination, and the fact that the others are both at well over 1,000 mons at this point. It did a few things right though, and it tends to skew weird more often than not, which despite sounding counterintuitive actually does a lot in deepening the connection with already enamored fans. Less universal appeal, but a stronger hardcore draw is a big part of why Monster Rancher's fanbase is how it is. I think the formula for making something truly timeless and keeping people interested in your designs involves sticking to this area of the chart. You can go pretty weird and keep things interesting, but if you skew too cool or too cute, a lot of the personality gets lost and you end up making something that mostly works as a self-reference. Of course, it's not that two-dimensional and there are a ton of outliers, but the golden ratio is maybe the closest anyone has ever come to perfection in the history of design, and while you can argue that this might be marginally coincidental or complete bullshit, let me offer a counterpoint.
Knock, knock, open up the door, it's real!
A lot of people, especially younger people, see Monol's design for the first time and go, oh my god, it's a rectangle. Such a bad design. And to them I say, taste is subjective, but you're objectively a big dumbass if you think this eldritch abomination that should not be is just a boring rectangle. Monol is less of a rectangle and more of an unknowable concept that doesn't like to leave his apartment. We've all been there, buddy. Monol's also unknowable in a second sense in that it's one of the most mismatched characters in the game when comparing casual and competitive strength. Everything is working against Monol to be as bad as possible in casual play. The worst lifespan in the game, the second worst guts regen in the game, god-awful stats and gains, and a dizzying array of text to wallow through on errantry. And to top it all off, an over-reliance on defense, which is the absolute worst stat in the game, made even more pathetic through the 18 guts rate, which makes even small bits of withering too much to deal with in battle. It's dire. But if you build Monol right, he's one of the most oppressive monsters you can raise for competitive play. A swath of golem level efficiency heavy techs and obscenely accurate intelligence options give him a few different ways to play and horrify the opponent. In an unknowable and indescribable way, of course. The way Lovecraft would have done it. But I'm not as big of a coward as he is, so I'm going to describe it. Little bitch ass Lovecraft. Scared of the stuff he can't even explain. No wonder he's dead. Monol's got a dumpster fire level guts regen, and as such is often the case, that means his basic techs are severely overtuned to make up for it. Charge has plus 10 hit for 10 guts. That's a bit silly. Of course, a mon with Monol's guts rate doesn't get nearly as much utility out of a chip tech like this on average as a monster with a faster resource generation does. But if he manages to build a guts lead, it's one of the best techs in the game to roll down multiple times to blow up speed monsters. As we look at the rest of Monol's numbers, keep in mind just how debilitating an 18 guts rate is. These parameters may seem unfathomably high, but they're just like regular high. They're good. He's really strong, but he's not broken. Flattening's numbers are also good, but it's where we begin to see problems that will dog Monol elsewhere in his kit. Monol has very long animation times on a lot of his attacks, which really dampens how good they are numerically. Flattening would be among the absolute best basic techs in the game if his opponent didn't build a huge guts lead every time it connected. The flattening chain itself is a bit strange though. Flattening L is a more impactful move than its prerequisite, it has a small chunk of withering, and also has a shorter animation time both on hit and miss. Flattening L would be most monsters' best chip damage tech if they had access to it, and it sort of works that way for Monol as well. The downsides to L is that Monol often doesn't like to fill up too many slots with attacks, as it instead prefers to have many opportunities to save up guts instead, which runs counter to having stuff in slots 3 and 4. Flattening X is also pretty solid numerically, though it tends to underperform L by a decent bit, which honestly may be for the best because the comically long animation time on a hit means Monol opening a round with this is probably enough to give his opponent a guts lead he'll never be able to catch up on. Of course, you can always pray that they miss with whatever they decide to retaliate with, but that's not a particularly trustworthy strategy. Scratch is a tech that often doesn't see a lot of play despite its good tech values. Monol doesn't really benefit much from trying to wither, and against any fast guts rate tank, this move becomes a pretty severe liability. Scratch's real use is, somewhat counterintuitively, on intelligence builds. Monol has no intelligence techs in slot 2, and Scratch at least gives Monol the utility of being able to wither away a serious chunk of guts instead of just wasting his own time with flattening. It's weird to pick up a power tech for intelligence builds, but it's his best option in slot. Tentacles lean so heavy into the withering that even Monol has use for it though. This is one of the most devastating withering techs in the entire game. A round opening tentacles can set Monol up for success in a serious way, though 37 guts is a lot to spend for a monster with an 18 guts rate. This is not a tech without risk, but not a lot of game-winning techs are. Monol's heavy techs are peculiar. He's missing the ability to really swing for the fences and never manages to break B force, but they're also notably very accurate for the archetype, which more than makes up for the capped damage output. Needle Stabs is not the most impactful move Monol is capable of firing off, but it's very cost effective, and at only -2 hit, it sits as a consistent damage option more often than it does a Haymaker. After a Flattening L, this is the closest thing Monol has to cheap damage. Among a set of peculiar techs, Spike Stabs is the most peculiar. It's probably the least efficient of all of them, but it's also often the single most important tech he'll swing in any given match. Its prerequisite Needle Stabs is significantly better value if you look at the numbers straight up. Spike Stabs is not necessarily worth its cost on the same scale, but Monol doesn't get many chances to swing, so Spike Stabs' additional damage and still decently solid other values ends up making it more useful on average. Spike Bite is the closest thing Monol has to a wild nuke. It's in a sense his most traditional heavy this way. The most expensive of all his heavy techs, Spike Bite pushes up against A-Force, just falling short at 39. Spike Bite gives Monol a more risky damage option, and with all his heavy techs clocking in less than 30 guts, you can just get all three and have a pretty varied and consistent arsenal without ever having to really go all in. Knock is paying for assurance. Knock functions similarly to Spike Stabs, but at a higher consistency and cost rating. Knock is a pretty common pickup because at 35 cost it's expensive, but not prohibitively so for Monol, and at plus 10 hit the odds are in your favor that you'll actually connect. Monol can afford it, but it still often struggles to be as effective as Spike Stabs, and it feels terrible on a miss. It's a great tech, it's just not without its flaws. 2 knocks is a linear bump from Knock, plus 10 cost, plus 5 force, plus 5 hit, plus 5 withering. This ends up being Monol's main game closer. Really great damage and accuracy means Monol isn't often too broken up about emptying the bank to swing 2 knocks, though his chances of using it more than once a game are pretty low. And then for whatever reason, 3 knocks is hot garbage. Comparatively, plus 5 cost for a marginal damage boost and 50% withering boost is actually worth it. It's just not worth it for Monol specifically if he's already got 2 knocks. If 3 knocks was Monol's only special tech, it would probably be a common pickup to be honest, but its more diminutive forms offer so much more value that it ends up being completely eclipsed. If you really want the withering, then you've got it as an option, it's just not gonna outperform 2 knocks. So on the power side, Monol has heavy and withering techs, but on the intelligence side, it has its hit and sharp techs. Soundwave is a great tech for its cost, weakened significantly by the fact it's in slot 4. There are few worse options for a game opener than an accurate chip damage tech, but at least you can rely on it hitting. This is the 5th tech we've looked at so far with 10 or more hits, so while Soundwave is consistent, it's not a really unique move in Monol's kit. It doesn't offer a lot that he doesn't get elsewhere. Screech is the tech you swing when you really want to finish off an opponent. It's pretty expensive, and it's about the same force as Soundwave, but it has about triple the withering on average, and it has a colossal plus 24 hit. Screech is probably going to land, and that's its entire goal. Just land the hit. It may not do much damage, but this is one of the best options you can swing once your opponent is low on life. Strange Light doesn't really see much play. And that's a bit sad, because I think it's a cool tech. 18 cost is not a lot, but it's really predicated on landing that crit, and this means it's a bit spooky to rely on. The damage is okay for its cost, but probably not enough to be something that you can build off of entirely. If you're running Intelligence Monol, you have to decide how you want your slot 3 to play, and it's either unreliable damage output of Strange Light or the godly accurate and negligible damage of Screech. Both have their issues, but if you want extra oomph, Strange Light definitely has some use. Beam is kind of like an even more damage-oriented version of Needle Stabs. Needle Stabs got additional withering, and this would really help out Beam's frame 1 opener potential and offset its cost, but what are you gonna do? Beam is also blistering fast on a miss at 1.5 seconds, which gives it a ton of consistency as an opener, since Monol gets right back into building its guts on a miss. Double Beams ups the withering considerably, but the extra cost and worse accuracy hurt it overall. It's not as focused in its goals as its prerequisite usually ends up being, and because of this, it's ostensibly a worse version of the single beam in practice. Triple Beams is a special tech, and it's a huge round opener. Good withering and nearly 50% chance to crit and turn into a 57 force tech is hard to overlook. 40 cost on Monol is a lot to spend though, and that is its main drawback. It's also really below curve if it doesn't proc the crit, so there's a lot of gambling going on when you decide to run triple beams. Ray is kind of an incredible tech for its cost if you're looking at the numbers in a vacuum. The only thing holding it back is its focus on withering over damage, which is normally not something Monol actually wants. It's very similar to Tentacles with a bit of impact traded for consistency. Ray is a staple pick for intelligence Monols as it covers up charge, which is, useless otherwise. Double Raise is plus 5 cost for plus 5 force and withering. A small bump to accuracy keeps it in line, and it ends up being very similar to Ray, and since it's such a pain in the ass to grind for techs with Monol, most people get Ray and stop. Double Raise usually ends up in limbo. It's not different enough from Ray to justify the struggle, and it only ever is really learned specifically as a prerequisite for Monol's final tech. Triple Raise is another plus 5 cost for plus 5 force and withering, except this time it also adds 5 sharpness. Triple Raise is a pretty aggressive tech even with its middling damage due to the fact it can wither 50 guts on a hit. Again, 45 guts is a ludicrous cost for Monol, but there are serious upsides to finishing this chain. Intelligence Monol has 3 power techs, 2 of which are in a slot you can never cover up and none of which you ever really want to use. With the entire Ray chain learned, your odds of using charge go down to 25% at any given time, and additionally your odds of using flattening and scratch also go down if you're constantly blowing 40 plus guts on double and triple Raise. Maybe not a great strategy to always be broke, but it does increase the chance of actually using the techs you want to see your Monol using. Monol has a lot of options for builds with how many great techs he has. On the power side, it's common to pick up all the heavy techs and knock, or forego Spike Bite for tentacles. 2 knock sees play too in any build you'd pick up knock for, it's just that because it's a special tech, you gotta go to Korea, which raises your defense, and because Monol's got a slow guts rate, normally you're not working on defense, you're raising speed instead. So it's kind of a pain to chain knock and then deal with the leftover defense in your build you get from going to Korea. Flattening L is also pretty common and gives Monol a ton of value for just 15 guts. On the intelligence side, Ray and Scratch are required pickups, but then your choices branch out quite a bit. Are you going to pick up the sharp techs or the hit techs? You probably don't want to go all in on hit because of how low the damage output is on its own, but I actually won a tournament with this exact build. Mind you, it was almost everyone except me's first tournament, but a dub is a dub. If you pick up both hit techs, you're probably doing so to facilitate a minus skill build, allowing you to put more points into your survivability. This would be done for lower stat cap tournaments, not necessarily something like heavyweight 3500, or maybe something like welterweight, which often has monsters running full speed and 1 life, so a single hit is enough to win. Triple Raise is a massive pain in the ass to acquire for the same reason 2 knocks is. except more so. But as we talked about earlier, there are definitely advantages to giving models something to blow a ton of guts on the intelligence side. If you're using beam, it's probably because you're focusing on a bad-natured stress build, which pushes up the crit rate to 37%. The awkward bit of this build is that you would probably want to pick up Strange Light 2 to really benefit from the bonus, but going with Sharp Attacks in slots 3 and 4 means you're giving up a lot of accuracy potential. The optimal build probably lies somewhere in the middle with Beam and Screech, or, it would, if it wasn't for one specific model spawn. You see, while not explicitly the best model for intelligence builds, there is one specific spawn in DX that starts with Ray and, well, flattening out. It's awkward, but it allows you to start building up Ray uses in case you want to grind for triple Rays, and getting both Screech and Strange Light means less uses of throwing an L. Additionally, a 13 Guts rate means it's faster than any normal lethal model spawn, and a much longer lifespan gives you time to fine-tune your builds and fix mistakes. But wait, that's not all. It also starts with Grit, and the fastest arena movement speed it as a breed has access to. Arena movement speed isn't something we've really talked about before, as it's a parameter that really shines under player control and not necessarily AI, but model normally has the slowest arena movement speed available with a rating of E. This in and of itself is not inherently a huge deal, but Monol is also the smallest monster in the game by width when it comes to taking up space in the arena. Monol starts with a huge gap between it and its opponent, and it often takes a very long time to move from slot 4 to 1 or vice versa. What this means is he often spends less time attacking, which is A, good for building up guts, but also B, often the reason you lose games. A very fast arena movement speed can also be a liability, as the faster a monster is, the more likely it flies over slots 2 and 3, often only attacking in slots 1 and 4. This is a major problem for Pixie, for example, and a reason why it's as bad as it is. This spawn wants to avoid slot 2 whenever possible, so the faster it's able to move, the better. But the pros know if you're really trying to maximize your model and you don't care about ease of use, then the best model is a Soboros so you can get Cocoon from a Flower Worm. 12 Guts rate and access to whatever battle specials you want makes this the best model in every scenario. Cocooning is a godsend to a monster with techs as strong as models are, and an already pretty good monster is made just that much more powerful through cocooning. If you need a primer on cocooning, I go over it in both my Worm Rundown and my Unlocking All Monsters vids so you can brush up on your entomology knowledge with those. This ability to cocoon makes Monol one of the absolute strongest monsters in the game, which is fascinating given his poor potential as a monster for beginners. And to go along with that power level, Monol is also one of the strongest designs in the franchise. It's both bizarrely complicated and also as simple as possible. That's hard to accomplish in character design, so of course in Tecmo's infinite wisdom, it meant him being sidelined for the remainder of the franchise after Monster Rancher 2. Hell, most of Tecmo's weirdest mons never saw the light of day after 2 except in spin-off games. We got Galley, Niton, Centaur, Metalner, Worm, Zilla, Arrowhead, all fan favorites, all gone. And then the franchise died. Coincidence? Hey everyone, thanks for watching this video. Monol's one of my favorites. I've probably raised more competitive Monols than any other monster except maybe Arrowhead. Niton's up there too. If you want a primer on how good Monol actually is, Koei Tecmo ran an official tournament when DX came out, and the winner was a Monol, which is crazy because it beat all the Rippers, it beat all the Kamuis, beat Golems. Strong monster. Bracket luck in a best of one format means that monsters are capable of getting lucky and winning more often than they would normally, but Monol, while maybe not actually at that power level, is pretty close. And it was without a cocooned Monol as well, so you can only imagine how much stronger it gets with a 12 Guts rate. Thanks for watching this video. Thanks to all my Patreons for supporting me. We're almost at 1,000 members in the Discord, which is super cool. I got something planned when we actually hit that number, so, if you're not on the Discord yet, consider joining. You'll find out about all the tournaments, you'll get to meet a bunch of people, get advice on your builds. It's a great place to learn about Monster Rancher. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.